Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. And thank you for joining us today for this webinar on promoting inclusive education in crisis and conflict. I hope everyone is in. And before we begin, just a few quick housekeeping notes. Please note that simultaneous interpretation is available in English, in French, and in Spanish. Please move to the next slide. Please select your preferred language on Zoom. We are also sharing the slides in French and Spanish in the chat, so you can follow along in the language of choice. Please take a moment to introduce yourself in the chat. We'll be happy to have that. And throughout the session, we welcome your engagement. Please submit any questions for the panelists through the Q&A box so we can gather them for the discussion later in the hour. And use the chat for comments, reflections, and resources. We very much encourage a dynamic exchange today. All right. So once again, it is my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the two partners that organize this webinar, the Global Partnership for Education, Knowledge, and Innovation Exchange, GPE KIX, and the Education Research in Conflict and Protracted Crises consortium, ERICC. Today's webinar sits at the meeting point of these two bodies of work. ERICC's Global Evidence Review brings together rigorous cross-context evidence on what improves access, quality, and continuity of education in conflict and crisis. And just as importantly, on where the evidence gaps still exist. So GPE KIX, on the other hand, brings the applied side. So research projects testing how those promising approaches can actually be adapted, how they can be scaled, embedded in real education systems, including for out-of-school children and learners affected by emergencies. So we have just shared two links in the chat, so keep an eye in the chat. So just share two links there in the chat that we'll be drawing on throughout. So that is ERICC's Global Evidence Review and GPE KIX project portfolio on out-of-school children and education emergencies. So I'd encourage you to open both. They are the evidence base behind today's conversation. So here is how we're going to spend the hour together. You can see it on the agenda on the screen. We'll move through three major parts. So the first, we shall try to set the stage. So with these introductions and opening remarks, but also shortly we shall be followed by an overview of ERICC's the recent Global Evidence Review. Then research and policy insights, improving education access and outcomes for internally displaced adolescents in Nigeria, and reflections on translating evidence into inclusive education policy and practice in conflict and crisis. And then finally, we shall have a dialogue, a moderated discussion, and then audience Q&A, which is where the questions you put in the Q&A box come in. So without wasting any more time, with that flow that I've just given, we are very fortunate this morning, this afternoon, or evening, depending where you are, to be joined by an excellent panel. So setting the stage and starting us off from the global evidence base will be Professor Oladele Akogun. So the friends call him Ola, Professor Ola. And then he's ERICC's Regional Research Director for Nigeria and South Sudan, and he's also a senior researcher at the Airbel Impact Lab. And then bringing insights from the field in Nigeria, Professor Jesse Uneke, who leads the GPE KIX Bridge Ideas Project. It does projects on internally displaced adolescents. And in speaking to the policy side from inside government, we shall have Mrs. Anigbogu, who is the Director of Education Planning, Research and Development in Nigeria's Federal Ministry of Education. And serving as our discussant, of course, will be Keis, who is the Education Specialist at the Global Partnership for Education. So with that, let's get the stage set by hearing from ERICC's Global Evidence Review. So Professor Oladele or Akogun, please, the floor is yours. Thank you. I think you're muted.
I'm sorry. So my name is Ola. As you've introduced me, I am pleased to join you today from the ERICC Research Consortium and to present our evidence review On behalf of my colleague, Tegendra Ferrari of the Faculty of Education and Society at University College London, and Gray Reinhardt, who is an independent researcher focusing on Myanmar. The rigorous evidence which we reviewed spans 59 studies of promising practices of education interventions aiming to improve access to, quality of, and continuity of education in the context of conflict and protracted crisis. We focus on 3 groups of marginalized learners. 1, children with disabilities, language minority children, and the 3rd, internally displaced children. Next slide. Okay, thank you. Many disadvantages are faced in this context of crisis. 1, compounded by vulnerabilities, trauma, poverty, exclusion, and risk of recruitment when separated from family. That's 1. 2nd, there is no binding international legal framework that protection is treated as a domestic matter, leaving large governance gaps. And 3rd, in practice, this means damaged schools, teacher shortages, and children who are effectively invisible to educational planners. There is a lot in the next slide. There is a lot we could share on our approach and methodology. But in summary, let me just summarize it. We screened over 6,000 studies and coded 59 in depth, focusing on 38 relevant to internally displaced children. We do not have time to go in depth on the review results, but there is a glimpse, and we will follow up and share the full evidence review and its related policy brief. 4 practices in the next slide. 4 practice areas showed promise. 1, in contexts including Somalia and Turkey, cash transfers and vouchers which offset financial barriers to school participation, and in the context of Uganda school feeding programs, which incentivize attendance. That's 1. Flexible, context-appropriate, accelerated, and remedial learning programs that sustain learner persistence, such as non-formal learning centers in northeastern Nigeria, as well as healing classrooms in Niger Republic. The 3rd one is group-based and creative expressive therapies using locally defined well-being indicators. And this includes narrative trauma-focused therapy in Palestine and school music in Colombia. The 4th is child-friendly spaces, which offer structured, sustained, and recreational and learning activities with adequate resourcing. Gaps. 2 critical gaps stand out, and that should be in the next slide. 1, a lack of reporting on disaggregated academic, SEL, or well-being outcomes. Without subgroup analysis, equity gains cannot be assessed, and persistent gaps between displaced host community children stay hidden. They remain hidden. Furthermore, the consideration of intersectional vulnerabilities and overlapping disadvantages is really a cross-cutting gap. It is important for measuring equity effects. And the 2nd one, on the policy front, no studies examine system-level change. While some may have been undocumented implementation, it leaves little understanding of how equity-oriented policies enacted and sustained amid instability when marginalization risk is highest. Ideally, more evidence should be generated on the effect of policy system change that adopts an intersectional understanding of disadvantages. The next one. Contextual interventions and program design. These leverage local beliefs, relationships, and human resources, adapt SEL and well-being frameworks to local priorities, and intentionally target the equity gaps affecting the most disadvantaged children in conflict and crisis. Strengthening systems and policies for the right to education. Build inclusive institutional cultures by grounding marginalized voices. Advance national and international commitment to quality education for all, and reduce structural barriers facing children with disabilities, language minorities, as well as those in IDPs. Advanced equity focus and evaluation. Disaggregated impact data by displacement status, use robust mixed methods, interventions that enable equity-oriented policy change. I go to the next. Lastly, engage the political economy of education, design interventions that enable equity-oriented policy change, problematize exclusionary policies with political and grassroots actors, strengthen the agency of parents, teachers, students, and civil society to advocate for their right to education. Thank you.
Yeah, Professor Ola, I was just about to ask you to summarize, but thank you so much. Thank you for showing us some promising practices that they do exist: cash transfers, accelerated and remedial learning, child-friendly spaces, but also two stubborn gaps that you talked about. Outcomes are rarely, disaggregated for displaced children, and many other good things that you've brought forth. So thank you so much. Please remember, you can, if you have questions, the Q&A is open and the chat as well. So from the field, we would like to hear from Professor Jesse Uneke. Please tell us about what's happening in the GPE KIX project that you lead. Over to you. And please keep within the 5 minutes. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you very much, Patrick. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone, wherever you are at the moment. Thank you so much. My name is Jesse Uneke, and I'm the leader of the project in Nigeria on building resilience through inclusive development and gender-responsive life skill education for internally displaced adolescents in Nigeria. I am based at David Omai Federal University of Health Sciences, and we are working with Brooks Insight, partners in this project. Next slide, please. Yes, talking about the project overview, Nigeria is having a serious challenge with internally displaced persons. And among these, the adolescents are among those who are severely affected and impacted. And what we are trying to do is to address the numerous barriers to accessing quality education on this particular category of persons, young people, particularly the girl child and young adolescents. So the project aims to improve education access, retention, and learning outcomes for these internally displaced adolescents. And we are working with education stakeholders and communities of the internally displaced persons to co-design a context-specific curriculum that is adapted from UNICEF's life skills tools that will improve and scale up education skill program within the humanitarian response system that we have in Nigeria. Next slide. Yeah, so in order to do this, we looked at intersecting vulnerabilities, and we tried to embed mental health and well-being components into learning sessions, because this is very, very important, because our experience showed that it helps to address trauma, anxiety, and low self-esteem, which are all consequences of the displacement. And then we had to integrate gender equality considerations into what we did. And the reason why we did that was because girls face disproportionately higher risk or rates of depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder. We also observed that integrating economic empowerment initiatives in the LSC for these displaced girls and young women through cash-based interventions and vocational training did a lot to prevent transactional sex, forced marriages, and other forms of exploitation as a result of their condition. And then there was also a need for the implementation of survival center gender-based violence services. And we also made efforts to include that. And then a very good referral pathway for at-risk displaced girls and young women, so that we could integrate them into the society proper by enabling them to access counseling that will help improve their well-being in general. And then it's also important to state that young women, it's important for them to be part of the decision-making of their lives in those IDP camps. And we did that to encourage them to lead a normal life by participating in decision-makings concerning their lives and the management of their camps. Next slide. Now, we adopted a context-specific learning intervention. And this we did by co-designing flexible life skill education program that was specifically tailored to the displaced individuals. Of course, we used a lot of participatory and culturally relevant approaches to do this. And the key insights from this is that interactive learning methods such as role play, peer-to-peer group sessions, active participation, hands-on experience, all helped these young people, the girls especially, and the adolescents, to be able to have better understanding in
Professor,
the things that...
Okay.
Yes.
So you should be winding up. You have some time to discuss with more, so you should be winding up now. No? All right. So these are part of what we engage. Then we were also able to actively engage the policymakers, to bring in some level of evidence to policy process and bridge the gap between that. And the policymakers contributed a lot in fashioning the project appropriately. Next slide. And there were a number of key challenges with the policy reform level, bureaucratic processes, and the stakeholders' availability. But the important thing was that it helped to bridge the gap that existed between policy, research, and engaging these stakeholders and the policymakers helped a lot in building very strong link for us to be able to move research to policy and practice. Next slide. So thank you very much. I wonder if Mrs. Anigbogu is there. She has connected. Can take it off from here. Thank you. All right. Thank you so much, Professor Uneke, with those good examples. And yes, we're running short on our time, but we'd like to hear from the policy side, some reflections from policy level, the policy level side. So I'd like to welcome Mrs. Anigbogu, who's the Director of Education Planning, Research and Development in Nigeria's Federal Ministry of Education. Over to you.
I didn't hear your question. What's your question?
So now the view we would like to hear from your view from inside the government, where evidence either gets used or it doesn't?
Where evidence is used?
Or it doesn't. Yeah, we want some policy level reflections from you.
Okay. Thank you very much for this opportunity. From the policy side, it is really very interesting, and to highlight at this point that the research and policy we are aligning and we are working together. There is this aspect of processes that we engage in the ministry, and they are in different levels. From the first part is the problem identification. Now, when we talk about problem identification, how we conduct research and policy making in the ministry is, it starts from that point. When the problem is identified, then that is at the point we call the theme for the year. We come up with a team, and that team is addressing issues concerning practical challenges that are faced by educators, managers, and teachers. And when we finish that team, we bring it up and consultations begin. The consultations is at the level of the states, where they will have to synthesize, they will have to design policies and draft policies at the state level. And when after that, we come up with what we call stakeholders engagement. And that is what we call in the ministry the reference committee meeting, where the directors of planning come together and bring up those policy designs that they have already formulated at the state level, and we come together for us to discuss on which policies that can be put in place. After that level, we go to the next level we call the plenary, where our permanent secretaries come for validation to validate what the policy designs that have been presented. And at the level of that, we now go to the next level, which we call the approval level, where the Honorable Minister and the commissioners come together to approve the policy. So this is our policy process in the ministry. And after that, we have implementation and the measurement and evaluation. Now, for the policy research that Professor Uneke was talking about, they have gone through this process. And I want to tell you that they are on track with how our policies are being developed. With the stages where they are now is at the stage of stakeholders engagement. So there is a synergy between the research and policy making in Nigeria. So, and I want to really commend Prof on this particular activity that he's conducting, and that to assure you that from our own point of view, we are doing the right thing. But we have to note that some of the decisions that are taken are shaped by our government policies and our the realities on ground, emerging situations. So within the context of policy, within this context, policy plays a very critical role in ensuring that policies and practices are informed by credible evidence. So that is exactly what we are doing. But to tell you that sometimes evidences are not really influencing policy simply because that evidence exists. Yes, they are conducting a policy, but if that evidence, we know that that evidence exists, but the research has the greatest impact when it is available at the precise moment that policy makers need them. So therefore, researchers must understand the policy cycle and anticipate windows for opportunity where evidence can shape decisions. Now, the most challenge we have for both researchers and policymakers is to ensure that evidence is timely, is relevant, accessible, and responsive to the realities of the education system. So when research anticipates policy windows and responds to emerging needs, it becomes a powerful tool for shaping effective education policy and practices, advancing equity, improving learning outcomes. So when policies and research is synergized and at the appropriate time. For instance, what happened during COVID? Yes, there were instances, there were evidences of what the effect of COVID was. But if policies was not taken at that time, and you come now to start making policies on what have happened at COVID, that is exactly what I'm saying. There are evidences, but the policy, the research is not synergizing with the policy making. So the research and policy making must always come together. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Just confirm that you can hear me.
Yes.
Sorry, so got a little technical problem there.
I'm hearing you.
Oh, great. Great. Thank you so much. We shall proceed. Very, very interesting insights that you gave us there. Just allow me to I got a little problem with my computer. All right, so thank you so much. Very interesting insights here, Mrs. Anigbogu, and very, very good vital reminders that evidence is only as useful as it's fit with how government actually decides issues around timing, credibility, and all that. So at this point, I think I want to invite our discussant, some reflections from Joa. Kindly share with your insights, what you take out of all this. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Patrick, and thank you to our distinguished panelists and presenters. It's great to be with you all today. And I think what strikes me most from today's discussion is that I think each presentation approached this issue from a different perspective, right? We had the global evidence, the applied research, and the government experience. And I think they converge around some common threads. And I think for me, the first thread is that, educational exclusion that's experienced by IDPs can't be simply understood in isolation, but it really needs to be set in a broader education system context. Conflict and crisis don't create exclusion per se, but they magnify existing inequalities. I think across many GP partner countries, we have large numbers of children that are out of school for structural reasons, whether it be poverty, gender inequality, disability, I could go on. But what's key is that crisis compounds these vulnerabilities, and it forces often the most marginalized children into displacement, making them even harder to reach within existing education systems. And I think that's an important shift in perspective, because I think it means that the response to these issues can't remain purely emergency or humanitarian, but we need approaches that strengthen national education systems to ensure that they're more inclusive and resilient before, during, and after crises. And maybe that leads me to kind of the second thread that I noted, and that's around context. I think the ERICC evidence review reminds us that there's no universal model or one-size-fits-all to support IDPs, but effective interventions need to be locally adapted. They need to address existing intersecting vulnerabilities and really respond to the realities of children in that context. And I think at the same time, I think we also heard some tensions around the emerging evidence, in the sense that as of now, many promising practices and results we have are at program level, but we have a lot more to learn on how successful pilots can become sustained government policy or nationally financed programs. And I think that's exactly where the experience from Nigeria and the Bridge EDA's experience from Nigeria is kind of provides an important contribution to this discussion, because I think what stood out to me is that when you hear today's presentation, you understand that evidence uptake isn't something that was treated as something that happens. I said evidence uptake isn't treated as something that happens after research, right? But rather it's embedded throughout the research process itself. And I think the project outlined how it did a good job of engaging a diverse range of country stakeholders, investing and strengthening policymakers' capacity to use evidence and engage with government stakeholders. And I think one of the most powerful lessons from this Nigeria example is that policymakers are clearly willing to engage with evidence when researchers engage them as partners and not simply as an audience, right? And I think it's so critical that researchers invest in building those relationships, understanding policy processes, and supporting and aligning with government priorities. And I think from a G perspective, I think this is an important lesson that we're seeing across the KIX portfolio, is that generating evidence is not enough, right? We need it to be usable evidence. It needs to be tangible. And I think it needs to be co-created with governments, aligned with national priorities, and positioned to inform policy dialogue where changes are happening. And I think for me, that maybe kind of leads to thinking about how we understand how sustainability works at scale. And I think this is where there's an opportunity to connect the work through ERICC and our country-level KIX research with another GP initiative, which is the research on scaling the impact of innovation and education, ROSI, to throw another acronym into the mix. And I think ERICC is helping to strengthen the global evidence base on promising approaches and for marginalized learners in crisis-affected context. I think we see the Bridge IDRC program in Nigeria that demonstrates how evidence can be generated with policymakers, not simply for policymakers. And I think that the ROSI's research adds a critical dimension. It kind of reminds us that scaling is not simply about expanding successful pilots, but rather scaling happens within complex-oriented systems. And that it's not only whether innovation works, but it's also understanding under what conditions, through which institutions, and how governments can embed into existing systems so that impact can be really sustained over time. And I think there's enormous value of bringing these different strands of work together. Because ultimately the goal isn't simply to deliver better projects in crisis, but it's to build education systems that are more resilient, enough to continue reaching children, including IDPs, long after crises have ended. So with that, those are my initial reflections, Patrick. Thank you so much, and back over to you.
Thank you, Joe. It's a useful pivot from the presentations to the other questions, especially how inclusion becomes a practical and system relevant when the system itself is under stress. So thank you so much. So thank you so much, all our speakers. We're running short of time, but now we move to our discussion. And I would like to pose two questions to the panel, and I'll ask for some very brief reflections. Please take 1 or 2 minutes each, so we hear from everyone and still protect some time for the audience's questions. So the first question is about prioritizing the evidence gaps. So ERICC's global evidence review highlights key evidence gaps when it comes to reaching the most disadvantaged learners in conflict and crisis. And as we've had, these included data disaggregation with an inclusion lens, understanding equity gaps in program outcomes, research on policy level reform and system coherence, cost analysis and engagement with the political economy of education and conflict, and the consideration of intersectional vulnerabilities and overlapping disadvantages. So the question is, for a ministry facing displacement on a fixed budget, which of these gaps has to come to which of these gaps has to close first? So I'll start with you, Professor Ola, and then we can move to Mrs. Anigbogu, and then Professor Uneke. And Joy, you can also come in at the last as some last reflections on that as well. So over to you, Professor Ola.
Oh, thank you very much. From our reflections on different studies, and particularly this one, the hidden children, they are a priority. And otherwise, they remain hidden no matter what we do. Disaggregated data is the answer to that. If there is a pebble in beans, we like to eat beans a lot in Nigeria, you separate them to find the pebble. Otherwise, we keep having that knocking teeth. So we need to behave like the women do in the kitchen. Look for that pebble in the beans we want to cook. If you don't find it, you are going to have the pebble inside the beans. It's not a palatable menu. That should be the priority.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Anigbogu. You're muted. You're muted. We can't hear you.
Yes. Can I be heard now?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead, please.
Okay. I think I share the same view with the last speaker. Honestly, I have to prioritize a disaggregation of the data. because the reason is just straightforward. Before deciding how to allocate scarce resources, all of us know how scarce our resources are. We must know who is being left out, and we must know where they are, and then why existing interventions are not reaching them. So without all this information, even a well-funded program may risk impacting the right people. So in the conflict crisis, in the conflict affected area, aggregate enrollment figures can be misleading when we have the enrollment figure, but a ministry may report increased access to education, while significant groups like girls, children with disability, internally displaced people in remote communities or children from extremely poor homes remain excluded. So, but when we have a disaggregated data, it allows decision-making and to identify these hidden disparities. So for me, that has to be prioritized before we talk about equity gaps in program outcomes. I will even, the way you run down the priority areas, I tend to rearrange them, but I have to prioritize disaggregation of data. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very good reflection as well. And Professor Uneke, any thoughts on that as well?
Yes, exactly. I still align my own thoughts to what the Professor Ola has said and Mrs. Anigbogu. We are researchers, and when data is disaggregated, it makes for better evidence to policy process. And that's exactly what we have discovered, the direction that the policymakers are going. And so what we have done is to align, exactly towards where they are going, so that the evidence generated can easily be taken up for policy and practice. And so it's something that cannot be overemphasized. The data must be disaggregated and they must be context specific. That's exactly what we are doing. And then the ministry takes it up when the evidence gets to them. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So what we're hearing is without data, disaggregated data, we cannot target. So thank you so much for that. So we can move on to our next question, which is about embedding inclusive approaches into systems. So at GPE KIX, we are actively working to address the key evidence gap on policy level reform and system coherence. So I would like to hear from our panelists, from your perspective, what does it take to embed successful and inclusive approaches into national education systems in conflict and crisis settings? So I will direct specific angles of these questions to each of you. So something very specific. So I'll start with you, Mrs. Anigbogu. So please reflect on what would best support you in the uptake of research mid-crisis, and what has presented the biggest challenge in this regard.
The value of research during a crisis is determined less by its implement sophistication and then more by its timeliness and relevance, and as well as the usability. During a crisis time, policymakers are often making decisions under intense pressure. So within complete information, we run into conclusions because everybody wants to get the result quick. So what will best support the uptake of research mid-crisis is first and foremost rapid and actionable evidence. So ministries do not always have the luxury of time to wait for lengthy studies and comprehensive evaluation. So we need concise evidence, rapid assessments, and policy briefs, and clear recommendations. Because research that answers practical questions such as where displaced learners are concentrated, which interventions are reaching them, and what barriers remain. So the second aspect of it is between researchers and the policymakers. Research uptake is much stronger when researchers work alongside government officials, which I believe in the process of what Prof is doing, we are working together. So throughout the process, rather than presenting findings only at the end of a study, that is one of the problems we are having. You will see research work that is just presented to you, how it has gone through, whatever thing that has gone through, we don't even know. So, and we can't even say for sure whether the right people were being considered. So another one is accessible and disaggregated data system is very, very essential. And so during crisis, ministries need reliable information and can be broken down by location, gender, just like a disaggregated data. So without this level of detail, it becomes difficult to target interventions effectively and assess whether the most marginalized learners are being reached. So these are some of my views from that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that. So let's also hear from Professor Uneke on that. So your question is, please reflect on how your GPE KIX supported research has engaged policymakers throughout the project cycle to position the findings to support policy level reforms. And that builds on from what Mrs. Anigbogu has been talking about. Over to you. One minute or two, please. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Patrick, for this. And I want to say that one of our major, or what I can say, our outstanding success factor was the establishment of Study Advisory Group, which had the policymakers in the ministry and then other key stakeholders along with us, the researchers, in one study advisory group. And so the research that we did was tailored towards the needs of the ministry, the policymakers. And that was exciting. It's usually not the common thing that is done traditionally when researchers are conducting their research. But we were now able to be guided on the areas where the needs, evidence are required in order to improve the livelihood of these displaced adolescents in the IDP camps. So I can say without mincing word that is one of the most successful, success factors that helped our project to have the kind of impact that it has had. And I want to make this recommendation. I don't know how many people that are researchers connected to this webinar, but it's time that we start tailoring our research in the universities and higher institutions to the policymakers' needs, because that makes for easy uptake of the research. The evidence we have generated, the study has not yet concluded, but the ministry has already taken it up and already preparing to put it in the policy process to get up a policy that will improve the lives of the displaced adolescents in terms of improving their life skill education. This is exciting, and I want to make this recommendation very, very strongly. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. So I think we've lost one of our speakers. Maybe when Keis gets back, we can reconnect. But Joa, if you have any reflections on that, I'm glad to give you a minute to just share your reflections on that quickly before moving on.
Thank you, Patrick, and thanks again. A really interesting conversation. I just think listening to the responses, I think what really emerged was this question around data and the importance of data, and data being really the basis for taking everything forward. And I think for me, I have a lot of questions. I think there's a lot of things to reflect on. I mean, how do you go about developing quality, predictable, reliable, and inclusive data in emergency contexts? Understanding that every context has its challenges, its nuances, but it's been a challenge historically within the sector. And how do we do that effectively? And how do we go about mainstreaming, emergency-related data into EMIS systems so they can really inform government decision-making and policy dialogue? And how do you manage kind of the political economy around data and emergencies, understanding the sensitivities that some of that data can bring up with governments and partners? And maybe part of the response to that, but another element that I think I heard during the panel discussion is I think just the importance of partnerships. There are so many diverse partnerships that are critical to making this work. Partnership between researchers and policymakers, but also partnerships between governments and local communities. and researchers and practitioners, humanitarian actors. I think the strength of the partnerships, that was brought up around the advisory group, I think is representative of how critical that element is to work effectively in these contexts and generally meet the needs of the most marginalized learners. I think those would be some of my takeaways. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So thank you so much.
Sorry, can I just take 1 second? Just a second. I won't take much.
1 second.
Just to respond to one concern that he mentioned concerning how we get this data under EMIS. I want to inform you that in the EMIS, one of our fields, when data is being in data collection, now we have gone digital. Is already a digitized EMIS that we are having. We don't do our manual EMIS again. But in one of the fields is education in attack. We want to know what type of attack. So it's already a field in the NEMIS platform. So we collect data based on that as well. So it's not a strange thing to have a data on the crisis areas. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that addition. So we want to give we have very few minutes left. So I'm just going to prioritize 2 questions only from our Q&A. These are questions that have come in from the audience. So the first one, and Professor Uneke, maybe you could take this one, and then another could be taken by Mrs. Anigbogu. So the first question is, how can inclusion move from project language to operational reality? That is budget lines, trained staff, accessible materials, transport, assistive technology, referrals, and measurable outcomes. So the question is, how can inclusion move from project language to operational reality?
All right, thank you very much. The best approach or the best way to achieve this is by letting the ministry or the government agency that is in charge of policy making and implementation to drive that. And one of the ways to make that is to generate evidence that they can use to be able to do their budgetary provisions. Now, every year there is budgetary provision to get all these things done. But if the correct evidence is not provided and in timely manner, the ministry may be doing their budgeting outside of the critical areas that research has generated. And so I still maintain that the best way to translate evidence into policy and practice and operationalize it, it's by getting the evidence available to the policymakers very, very timely and in the format that they can easily use to be able to make their plans and then develop budget lines that the government can provide the needed budget to operationalize those issues. So that's just the only way to get this done, especially in low and middle income setting where you don't have resources. So when the resources that are actually being used, let them be used based on evidence that is generated and made available to the policymakers in the very, very timely manner. And this is where we, the researchers, have a lot of responsibility to do that. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Before I come to you, Mrs. Anigbogu, there's a question I would love to pose to Ola because he's back and he didn't have a chance to speak to us earlier. So Ola, this question comes from the audience as well. Says, I enjoyed the presentation on adolescent girls being highly vulnerable during displacements. However, my mind goes to children with special educational needs who are likely disproportionately affected during crisis. What frameworks exist to ensure their equitable access to targeted interventions? What framework exists to ensure their equitable access to targeted interventions?
Great. Yeah, okay, thank you very much.
So let's have Professor Oladele speak to that. Then I come to you, Mrs. Anigbogu.
Yeah. Chair, I think that question is more suitable for Mrs. Anigbogu, but from a research perspective, our data should not hide them. When our data reveals where they are and who they are, then we pass them on, and of course, Dr. Anigbogu can then address them.
Great. So, Mrs.
Okay.
Yeah, some reflections
So,
there.
is the question coming from the moderator or from my co-panelists? So let me know.
We are the audience. It's coming from the audience.
Moderator?
Yeah.
Do I take it up from there?
Yes, please take it up from there. Thank you.
Okay. Well, from the government perspective, anyway, to some extent, we are guilty because most of our education responses are designed to take care of an average learner. So inclusion cannot be an afterthought in crisis and conflict response. So it must be the starting point for planning. But for what the ministry is doing on that, we have agencies that are responsible. Now, what we are doing right now, like I mentioned, that we have a digitized platform for MEs. And we have this platform, and every state is keen. Our annual school census is collected digitally now. Now, in fact, next week it's going to be launched. But what we found that we want to use as a baseline is a head count. Kaduna State has done it. Kano State has done it. It is in such a way that every individual is going to be identified and be located. So we want to have this data in our database. And once there is a data on them, there will be a plan for them. So like I mentioned, they are supposed to be carried along even at our planning stage. But right now, there is a focus on the people that are under displacement. So we want to, and the normal music we sing in Nigeria, out of school children. Out of school children can fall into this category as well. The numbers that are being rolled out is not really what it is. So with this head count, we are going to get this data. And with this data, the interventions will reach the right people. So we are getting there. There is already inclusion. After all, we have policies on inclusion. And for what Prof is doing, when he came, I told him, we don't have plans, for people in IDPs. But now with this research that they have done, or that is still just at the very last stage, we are translating it into a policy. We want skills to come into the IDPs. That is where we are heading to. So that even though they are not in their place, they are in the IDP camp, they should have skills as well. So, and that is also a government plan. So when these things translate into a policy, the plan is already there and there will be a budget line for it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And we just have a few minutes to conclude this webinar. Thank you so much. And I want to give each one of you 1 minute, just 1 minute. What's the one takeaway you want this audience to live with on inclusion in crisis and conflict? Just 1 minute, each one of us. I'll start with you, Ola. 1 minute.
Well, they are part of the society. They deserve foundational education, that those who are marginalized, and they should be included.
Thank you. And Professor Uneke?
Yes, it's important. Thank you very much. It's important to understand that different settings of displaced persons have peculiar educational needs. So it's important to identify those peculiar and context-specific needs in different settings and make these information available and in timely fashion to the policymakers. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Mrs. Anigbogu? You're muted. You're muted, we can't hear you.
Sorry, I'm sorry. Both policymakers and researchers, we need to ensure that no child becomes hidden, invisible. Even if the child is in the conflict area, is displaced, and has the poverty, or we need to ensure that every child matters in this country. And it is only through data collection that we'll be able to locate them. So I think we are on the track. to get these things in the proper perspective. Thank you.
Great. Indeed, every child matters. Lastly, from Joe.
Thank you, colleagues. Again, some great reflections. I think for me, I think reaching the most marginalized children requires policies and national strategies that are nationally led but locally owned, and really ensuring that there's that strong translation from national policy to decentralized levels of government, and that it's operational at the local level, and that it's inclusive of local governments, but also of civil society and the important role that they play in meeting the needs in some of these contexts. Those are some of my final reflections. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So, colleagues, we're coming to the end of this. Just a few remarks. Thank you so much. We've not been able to answer all the questions in the Q&A, but I mean, one of the reasons why we have these kinds of meetings is to get connections. So we should be able to reach out to the people that presented or the people you met in the chat to make sure those that introduced themselves, to make sure that you get an answer to your question. So thank you so much to our speakers and to everyone who joined us today. There are so many things we can take away from this. I can pick maybe one or two. One is about inclusion in crisis isn't peripheral. It's a test of whether a system delivers on its promise to the learners that are hardest to reach. We've talked quite a lot about evidence has to get more usable, not just more rigorous, but usable, better disaggregated data, real costing, and stronger evidence on system coherence and political economy. Maybe a third thing about none of this really works in sequence. Researchers, policymakers, practitioners, and donors have to build evidence together from the start and not just at the end, and this is Anigbogu made that very, very clear. Perhaps lastly, also on scaling inclusive approaches is not really duplication, it's adaptation, it's ownership, it's financing, it's trust building, and without that promising practice, stays isolated from the systems meant to sustain it. So thank you so much. We would love to leave you with one key ask, that you carry this message with you as we move with to other regional and global gatherings, including the upcoming Africa Foundation Learning Exchange, FLEX, and then others. And let inclusion be part of every conversation, whether it's FLN, whether it's EdTech or SEL, not a separate track to the side. So thank you so much, Professor Oladele. Thank you so much, Professor Jesse Uneke. Thank you so much, Mrs. Anigbogu. And of course, Joe, thank you so much for always coming through for this. And thank you to all our interpreters and everyone is in the background, technical and organizing teams, and to all of you for joining and contributing such rich questions. So wishing you a good rest of your day, and whoever is joining from wherever you're joining from, and enjoy the World Cup as well. Thank you so much.